I never thought I'd see the day when my own family would turn against me. Not after everything I'd sacrificed for them. But life has a way of teaching you its harshest lessons when you least expect it. My name is Richard Harmon, and at 67 years old, I believed I had seen it all. I'd built a life with my own two hands, a construction business that supported my family for decades, a beautiful colonial home in the suburbs of Boston that I'd lovingly maintained, and what I thought was an unbreakable bond with my only son, Michael. That Thursday morning started like any other. I woke before dawn, a habit from 40 years of construction work that my retirement couldn't break. The gentle snoring of my golden retriever, Max, filled the silence of my bedroom as the first hints of daylight filtered through the curtains. The empty space beside me had long since stopped aching. Margaret had been gone for almost 5 years now, taken by cancer that spread faster than any of us could have imagined. She never got to see Michael's wedding to Vanessa, never knew that our family home would become a battlefield. I made my coffee strong, the way I always had, black with just a touch of sugar. The kitchen was quiet, the polished granite countertops reflecting the soft morning light. It was a kitchen Margaret had designed herself, spending months poring over catalogs and visiting showrooms until every detail was perfect. "A kitchen is the heart of a home, Richard," she'd told me. I ran my calloused fingers over the cool stone, remembering how she'd smile when I came home covered in dust and concrete, how she'd laugh when I tried to help with dinner, but always managed to mess something up. The call came at 9:17 a.m. I remember looking at the clock on the microwave, the green digital numbers burning into my memory forever. Michael's number flashed on my phone's screen, but it wasn't my son's voice I heard when I answered. "Richard," it was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law of 3 years. Her voice sounded strange, tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "You need to come to Boston Medical Center right now. It's Michael." The drive to the hospital was a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, running a red light and nearly sideswiping a delivery truck. The words kept repeating in my head, "Come now." It's Michael, not Michael's been hurt or Michael's in the hospital. Just his name, spoken with that strange, tight voice. I knew before I even reached the hospital. A father knows these things. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my son's still body on that hospital bed, the sheet pulled up to his chest, his face ashen and unrecognizable. The doctor spoke in that practiced, gentle tone they must teach in medical school, words like massive coronary, and nothing could be done, washing over me like waves, threatening to pull me under. Vanessa stood by the window, her slender frame silhouetted against the bright morning sun. She didn't cry, didn't move to comfort me as I collapsed into the chair by my son's bed. I reached for Michael's hand, still warm somehow, as if he might squeeze back at any moment. My beautiful boy, just 38 years old, the captain of his high school football team, the first in our family to go to college, the child who'd once fallen off his bike and refused to cry until I'd turned away because big boys don't cry in front of their dads. "He hadn't been feeling well for weeks," Vanessa said flatly, still staring out the window. "He didn't want to worry you." I barely registered her words. All I could see was Michael as a toddler, taking his first steps across our living room floor. Michael at his graduation, tossing his cap into the air with a whoop of joy. Michael on his wedding day, nervously adjusting his tie as I told him how proud his mother would have been. The next few hours passed in a fog of paperwork and phone calls. Vanessa handled most of it, her composure never breaking, her designer heels clicking efficiently on the hospital's linoleum floors as she spoke with doctors and funeral directors. I sat beside my son, unable to leave him, unable to accept that the strong hands that had once gripped mine so tightly would never move again. "We should go," Vanessa finally said, touching my shoulder lightly. "There's nothing more we can do here." I nodded numbly and followed her out to the parking lot. The June sun was obscenely bright, the sky a perfect, mocking blue. "Follow me back to the house," she said, already sliding into her sleek black BMW, a birthday gift from Michael just 6 months ago. "We need to talk about arrangements." I trailed behind her car in my old Ford pickup, the same truck I'd taught Michael to drive in when he was 16. The familiar streets of the neighborhood I'd lived in for over 40 years now seemed alien, as if I'd never truly seen them before. The Bradford pear trees Margaret had loved were in full bloom, their white flowers drifting down like snow onto the perfectly manicured lawns. When we reached the house, my house, the one I'd built additions onto with my own hands, where I'd raised my son after coming home bone-tired from construction sites, Vanessa didn't bother waiting for me. She strode up the front walk, her back straight, her designer purse swinging from her arm. By the time I made it to the door, she was already in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of the expensive white wine she always kept in my refrigerator. "Sit down, Richard," she said, not offering me a drink. Not that I wanted one. All I wanted was to wake up from this nightmare, to hear Michael's laugh echoing through the hallways again. I lowered myself onto one of the kitchen stools, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. Max padded over, sensing my distress, and pressed his warm body against my leg. I reached down to scratch behind his ears, grateful for his simple, uncomplicated comfort. "Michael had a life insurance policy," Vanessa said, taking a long sip of her wine. "Did you know that?" I shook my head. It seemed such a strange thing to bring up now, just hours after. I couldn't even complete the thought. $2 million, she continued, her voice taking on a hard edge I'd never heard before. And the house. He put everything in my name last year, after that scare with his cholesterol. I barely registered what she was saying. $2 million seemed meaningless compared to the loss of my son. The house. Well, it had always been understood that the house would go to Michael eventually. It was our family home. "I've been thinking," Vanessa said, setting down her glass and fixing me with a cool stare. "This house is too big for just one person. And with Michael gone," she paused, but her eyes remained dry. "I think it's best if you find somewhere else to live." The words hung in the air between us, so outrageous that at first I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. "This is my home," I said slowly, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Margaret and I bought this land in 1983. I built the sunroom myself. Michael's height marks are still on the doorframe in the hall." Vanessa's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. "And now it's my home, legally. Michael made sure of that." "There must be some mistake," I said, the fog of grief momentarily lifting as confusion and the first stirrings of anger began to take its place. "Michael would never—" "It's all perfectly legal," she cut in, reaching into her purse and pulling out a folder. She slid several documents across the granite countertop toward me. "The deed transfer was completed last year. The life insurance policy names me as the sole beneficiary. Michael's will leaves everything to me." Her red lacquered nail tapped against the paper. "His signature, notarized." I stared at the papers, at my son's familiar scrawl at the bottom of each page. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Why?" I managed to ask, the single word catching in my throat. Vanessa shrugged one elegant shoulder. "Michael and I had plans, big plans. This," she gestured around the kitchen, her lip curling slightly, "was never going to be enough. We were going to sell once you—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Once I was gone. They were waiting for me to die. "I don't understand," I said, though a terrible understanding was beginning to dawn. "This was Michael's home. He loved this house." "Michael loved me," Vanessa said simply, "and he wanted what I wanted. What we both wanted was a fresh start without the baggage." Her eyes flicked over me dismissively. Baggage? I was baggage. The father who had worked 60-hour weeks to put his son through college, who had nursed his wife through her final illness while still running a business, who had welcomed Vanessa into our family with open arms, even when Margaret had whispered her doubts about the woman's intentions from her hospice bed. "Michael is gone now," Vanessa continued, her voice softening into something that might have been mistaken for compassion if not for the cold calculation in her eyes. "And I need to move forward with our plans. I'll give you 2 weeks to find a new place and pack your things." She paused, taking another sip of her wine. "I think that's more than generous, considering the circumstances." I felt something hot and wild rise in my chest, rage, perhaps, or despair, or some terrible combination of both. "Get out," I said, my voice a low growl that startled even me. "Get out of my house. Now." Vanessa's expression hardened. "This isn't your house anymore, Richard, it's mine. And if you don't leave willingly, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." She gathered the documents and slipped them back into her folder. "I've already spoken with my lawyer. Everything is in order." She stood, smoothing her expensive black dress. "I understand this is a difficult time for you. It is for me too, but business is business, and Michael would want me to be practical. Michael would never want his father thrown out of his own home, I said, my voice shaking. Not one day after his death, not ever. Vanessa's smile was cold and didn't reach her eyes. You didn't know your son as well as you thought you did, Richard. He changed after we met. His priorities shifted. She picked up her purse. I'll be staying with my sister for a few days. When I come back, I expect you to be making arrangements to leave. She headed for the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and I'll be taking Max. Michael always said he was really our dog, not yours. At this, something broke inside me. You will not take my dog, I said, standing up so quickly the stool clattered to the floor behind me. Max pressed closer to my leg, whining softly at the tension in the room. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Vanessa's face. She glanced at Max, then back at me. Fine, keep the dog. But everything else we discussed stands. She turned and walked out, the front door closing behind her with a quiet click that somehow sounded more final than if she'd slammed it. I stood in the kitchen, Margaret's kitchen, for a long time, my hand resting on Max's warm head. The house that had been filled with love and laughter for over 4 decades now felt hollow, haunted not by the ghosts of my wife and son, but by the betrayal that had apparently been brewing right under my nose. The documents Vanessa had shown me lay on the counter where she'd left them. I picked them up with trembling hands, forcing myself to read every line, every clause, every cold, legal word that stripped me of my home and my dignity. Everything appeared to be in order, just as she'd said. My son's signature at the bottom of each page seemed to mock me, a final betrayal from beyond the grave. But something nagged at me, something beyond the shock and grief and rage. The Michael I knew, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd been proud to call my son, would never have done this. Not to me, not to his mother's memory. There had to be more to the story, something I was missing. I walked slowly through the house, Max padding faithfully at my heels. In Michael's old bedroom, now converted to a home office, I ran my fingers along the baseball trophies still displayed on the shelves. In the living room, I stared at the family photos on the mantel, Michael's graduation, his wedding day, the three of us, Michael, Vanessa, and me. At last Christmas, my arm around my son's shoulders, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Had he been unhappy? Had I been so caught up in my own grief over losing Margaret that I'd failed to see my son drifting away from me, falling under Vanessa's influence? Or was there something more sinister at work? I sank into my recliner. The old leather one Margaret had threatened to throw out a dozen times, but never did because she knew how much I loved it, and tried to make sense of it all. The practical part of my brain, the part that had run a successful construction business for 30 years, began to take inventory. I had savings, not a fortune, but enough to live on comfortably if I was careful. I owned a small cabin up in New Hampshire that Margaret and I had bought as a weekend getaway years ago. I could go there, at least temporarily. But the deeper part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime building not just houses but a home, rebelled at the thought of simply walking away. This house contained my life's work, my memories. Margaret's rose garden out back that I still tended every summer. The oak tree we'd planted when Michael was born, now towering over the backyard. The slight unevenness in the living room floor that only I knew about from when I'd had to replace the joists after a water leak in '92. No, I couldn't just leave. Not without understanding what had really happened. Not without fighting for what was rightfully mine. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the living room floor, I made a decision. I would dig deeper. I would find out the truth about what had happened in the final years of my son's life. And if, as I suspected, Vanessa had somehow manipulated or coerced him into those legal arrangements, I would find proof. I would reclaim not just my home, but my son's legacy. First, though, I needed to lay my boy to rest. Whatever came after would have to wait until Michael was given the funeral he deserved. For now, I would play along with Vanessa's demands, let her think she'd won. But behind the mask of a grieving father, I would be watching, waiting, gathering information. Max whined softly and rested his head on my knee, his brown eyes looking up at me with complete trust. I scratched behind his ears, finding comfort in his simple, uncomplicated love. "Don't worry, boy," I murmured. "We're not going anywhere, not if I have anything to say about it." As darkness fell, I remained in my chair, not bothering to turn on the lights. In the shadows of the home I'd built, I began to form a plan. Vanessa might have legal documents on her side, but I had something she couldn't possibly understand. A lifetime of overcoming obstacles, of building things that lasted. My son might be gone, but I would not let his memory, or his father, be discarded so easily. Tomorrow would bring my son's funeral, a day I had never imagined facing. But the day after that would bring the beginning of my fight back. Vanessa had no idea who she was dealing with. She saw an old man, a relic to be cleared away like outdated furniture. What she didn't see was the steel beneath the weathered exterior, forged through decades of hard work and harder losses. I finally rose from my chair and made my way to bed, though I knew sleep would be elusive. As I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to both Margaret and Michael. I would uncover the truth, whatever it might be, and I would not rest until justice was done. The funeral was a glossy affair that bore little resemblance to the man my son had been. Vanessa had arranged everything with an efficiency that bordered on coldness. The sleek mahogany casket, the tasteful flower arrangements, the catered reception at an upscale hotel downtown. Michael, who had loved backyard barbecues and beer from the local microbrewery, whose idea of dressing up had been a clean pair of jeans and his one good blazer, would have hated every minute of it. I stood greeting mourners in a daze, shaking hands mechanically as a parade of faces moved past me. Some I recognized, old friends from the neighborhood, a few of my former employees, Michael's college roommate who'd flown in from California. But many were strangers to me, sleek professionals from Vanessa's world of real estate development, where she'd been climbing the ranks at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. Such a tragedy, they murmured, these people who had never known my son as a boy with skinned knees and a gap-toothed smile. He was far too young. Vanessa stood beside me, the perfect picture of a grieving widow in her designer black dress and tasteful pearl earrings. She accepted condolences with graceful nods, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Not once did she reach for my hand or offer a word of comfort. We were strangers sharing the same unbearable loss, yet worlds apart in how we experienced it. During the service, I listened as a minister who had never met Michael spoke of him in generic terms, celebrating a life he knew nothing about. When it came time for the eulogy, I expected Vanessa to rise, but instead she gestured for me to take the podium. "You should speak," she whispered, her voice carrying a hint of challenge. "You're his father." I stood on shaky legs and made my way to the front of the church, looking out at the sea of faces, some tear-streaked, others merely solemn. I realized this might be my only chance to remind everyone, including Vanessa, of who Michael truly was. "My son," I began, my voice cracking slightly, "was not the man many of you knew in these last few years." I saw Vanessa stiffen in the front row. The Michael I raised was kind to his core. He was the boy who saved half his paper route money to buy his mother a birthday present. The teenager who spent his summers helping me on construction sites, learning the value of hard work. The young man who sat by his mother's bedside during her final days, reading her favorite poems even when she was too weak to respond. I paused, gathering my strength. Michael believed in building things that last. He told me once that was why he went into engineering, because he wanted to create structures that would stand long after he was gone. He understood that a life well-lived leaves something behind, something solid and true. From the corner of my eye, I could see Vanessa's face hardening, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Good, let her hear the truth. In these last days," I continued, "I've been thinking about what Michael has left behind, not material possessions or legal documents, but the mark he made on our hearts. The memories that can never be taken away." I looked directly at Vanessa now. "And I promise you, Michael, those memories will be honored, your legacy will be protected, your father will make sure of it." The rest of the service passed in a blur. The drive to the cemetery, the final prayers at the graveside, the gentle lowering of my son's casket into the Massachusetts soil where generations of our family had been laid to rest. Through it all, I maintained my composure, even as I felt something hardening inside me, a resolve taking shape that would carry me through the dark days ahead. At the reception afterward, I noticed something strange. While Vanessa circulated among the guests, playing her role to perfection, a small group had gathered in a corner of the room. Michael's assistant, Elena, a quiet young woman with intelligent eyes who had worked with him for the past 5 years, his best friend from college, Dave, and his longtime accountant, a gray-haired man named Harold who had handled our family's finances since before Michael was born. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing in Vanessa's direction with expressions that ranged from concern to outright suspicion. When they saw me looking their way, Harold nodded slightly, as if making a decision, and the three of them approached me. "Mr. Harmon," Elena said softly, "we need to speak with you privately." I followed them to a small anteroom off the main reception hall. Harold closed the door behind us, his face grave. "Richard," he began, falling back into the informal address he'd used for decades, "there are things you need to know about Michael's financial situation, things that don't add up." "What do you mean?" I asked, though a part of me already knew, had suspected since the moment Vanessa had shown me those documents. "Michael came to see me about 3 months ago," Harold explained. "He was concerned about some unusual transactions in his accounts, large withdrawals he couldn't account for, changes to his investment portfolio that he hadn't authorized. He asked me to look into some contracts at work," Elena added, "projects where the numbers weren't matching up. He was worried someone was cooking the books." Dave, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. Mike called me the week before it happened. He sounded scared, said he'd discovered something big, something bad. He wouldn't tell me details over the phone, but he wanted to meet. We were supposed to get together this weekend." His voice broke slightly. "He never made it." I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications of what they were saying sank in. "Are you suggesting that Michael's death wasn't natural?" Harold raised his hands cautiously. "We're not suggesting anything specific. We're just telling you that Michael was investigating some very concerning financial irregularities. And now he's gone and his wife is suddenly in control of everything." "Has anyone gone to the police?" I asked. The three exchanged glances. "With what?" Dave asked. "We don't have proof of anything illegal. Just suspicions and a very convenient heart attack. And Vanessa's brother-in-law is a detective with Boston PD," Elena added quietly. "Any investigation would go through him." I felt the weight of their words settling on my shoulders like a physical burden. If what they were suggesting was true, then not only had I lost my son, but his death might not have been the simple tragedy it appeared to be. And Vanessa, could she really be capable of something so monstrous? "What do you have?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "What actual evidence?" "Not much yet," Harold admitted. "But I've been quietly looking into Michael's accounts. There are discrepancies, money moving in strange ways. And the timing of those legal documents, transferring the house and changing his will. They coincide with a period when Michael was experiencing some unusual health issues." "Health issues?" I echoed. "What kind of health issues?" "Dizzy spells, confusion, memory lapses," Elena said. "He played it off as stress, but it was getting worse. He'd forget conversations we'd had just hours before. He'd zone out in the middle of meetings. It wasn't like him at all." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "And when did these symptoms start?" "About 8 months ago," Dave replied. "Around the time Vanessa started pushing him to make all these legal changes." 8 months ago. Around the time Michael had become increasingly distant, canceling our weekly dinners, sounding distracted when we did speak on the phone. I'd attributed it to the demands of his job, to the natural pulling away of a son building his own life. Now I wondered if there had been something far more sinister at work. "We want to help you, Mr. Harmon," Elena said earnestly. "Michael loved you. Whatever happened in these last months, whatever he might have signed or said, it wasn't him." "Not really." I looked at these three people, virtual strangers to me, but people who had clearly cared for my son, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," I said simply, "but this could be dangerous." "If what you're suggesting is true, we know," Harold said grimly, "but Michael deserves justice, and you deserve to keep your home." As we prepared to return to the reception, Dave pressed a small flash drive into my palm. "Mike's personal files," he murmured. "He backed everything up religiously. Maybe there's something in there that can help." I slipped the drive into my pocket, my heart pounding. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt a flicker of hope, not for bringing my son back, nothing could do that, but for uncovering the truth, for ensuring that whoever was responsible would face consequences. When I rejoined the reception, Vanessa was holding court near the bar, a glass of champagne in her hand. Our eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, her mask slipped. The cold calculation I saw there sent a chill down my spine. She knew that I knew, or at least, she suspected. The game had begun. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body still operating on its lifelong schedule despite the emotional exhaustion of the previous days. Max stretched and yawned at the foot of the bed, his warm presence a comfort in the quiet house. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, turning Dave's flash drive over in my hands. Today would be the day I began to dig for the truth. But first, I needed to play my part in Vanessa's script, to make her believe I was defeated. When she arrived at the house around 10, dressed impeccably in a designer pantsuit despite supposedly being in mourning, I was ready for her. I deliberately left out several real estate listings, a notepad with calculations of moving costs, and a half-packed box of books in the living room. "I see you're being practical," she said, sounding pleased as she surveyed the evidence of my apparent surrender. "That's good, Richard. This doesn't have to be unpleasant." I nodded wearily, slumping my shoulders slightly, letting her see what she expected, an old man broken by grief and defeat. "I've found a few apartments to look at," I said. "Nothing special, but they'll do." "Excellent." She set her purse down on the counter and extracted a thick folder. "I've taken the liberty of drawing up some paperwork, just to formalize the transition." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, instantly wary. "Nothing complicated. Just an agreement stating that you're voluntarily vacating the premises and waiving any future claims to the property." She slid a document toward me. "My lawyer says it's standard procedure." I doubted very much that anything about this situation was standard procedure, but I pretended to study the paper. "I'll need some time to look this over. Maybe have my own lawyer check it." Vanessa's perfect smile faltered slightly. "There's really no need for that, Richard. It's quite straightforward." "Still," I insisted, "I'd feel better having someone look at it. Legal documents were always more Margaret's territory than mine." A flash of irritation crossed her face, quickly masked. "Fine, but I'll need it back signed by the end of the week. The real estate agent is coming on Monday to discuss listing the house." So that was her plan: sell my home, cash out, and disappear with her ill-gotten gains. "Of course," I said mildly. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask, did the doctors say anything more about what caused Michael's heart attack? He always seemed so healthy." I watched her carefully as I asked the question, looking for any sign of discomfort or guilt. She maintained her composure admirably, but I didn't miss the slight tightening of her jaw. "They said it was likely genetic," she replied smoothly. "Apparently, these things can go undetected for years. A time bomb waiting to go off." She paused, then added with just a hint of malice, "Perhaps you should get checked yourself, Richard. It would be a tragedy to lose you the same way." Was that a threat, a warning, or simply a cruel jab from a woman who clearly despised me? I couldn't be sure, but I filed the comment away, another piece in the puzzle I was assembling. "I'll do that," I said. "Now, if you don't mind, I have some calls to make about apartments." She seemed satisfied with how our conversation had gone, confident that I was falling in line with her plans. "I'll check in tomorrow," she said, gathering her things. "Oh, and Richard, don't forget to sort through Michael's old things in the basement. Anything you don't want will be donated." After she left, I waited a full 30 minutes, watching from the window to make sure she didn't double back. Then I retrieved my laptop, an old, seldom-used thing that Michael had insisted on buying me 3 Christmases ago, and plugged in the flash drive. The contents were organized with the meticulous attention to detail that had characterized everything my son did. Folders labeled by year, then by month, containing everything from work documents to personal finances to family photos. I started with the most recent folders from the past year. What I found made my blood run cold. Emails between Michael and his doctor discussing symptoms that sounded alarmingly like slow poisoning. Chronic stomach pain, hair loss, cognitive difficulties, unexplained bruising. The doctor had run tests, found elevated levels of certain metals in Michael's blood, but couldn't pinpoint a source. He'd recommended more comprehensive testing. Financial records showing large transfers from Michael's personal accounts to offshore entities with obscure names. Transfers that, according to notes Michael had made, he had no recollection of authorizing. And most damning of all, a folder labeled simply V, containing surveillance photos of Vanessa meeting with a man I didn't recognize in various locations around Boston. In one photo, she was clearly passing him an envelope. In another, they were locked in an embrace that was decidedly not business-related. My son had been investigating his own wife, and based on the dates of the files, he'd been getting close to something significant right before his death. I sat back, trying to process what I was seeing. If Michael had suspected Vanessa of criminal activity, perhaps even of poisoning him, why hadn't he gone to the police? Why hadn't he confided in me? The answer, I realized with a pang of guilt, was probably staring me in the face. He'd been protecting me, just as he'd protected me from his mother's diagnosis until she was ready to tell me herself. Just as he'd protected me from his own health concerns, not wanting to worry his old man. But now he was gone, and it was my turn to protect him. His memory, his legacy, and the truth of what had happened to him. I spent the rest of the day combing through the files, making notes, building a timeline of the last year of my son's life. A picture began to emerge. Vanessa, ambitious and ruthless, had married Michael for his financial stability and the connections his respected position in the engineering firm provided. But that hadn't been enough for her. She'd wanted more, much more, and had systematically worked to gain control of his assets while simultaneously undermining his health and mental clarity. The question was, had she escalated from slow poisoning to murder when Michael began to catch on? And if so, could I prove it? I knew I needed help, professional help, but I couldn't go to the police, not with Vanessa's brother-in-law potentially able to interfere. I needed someone independent, someone with experience in financial crimes and possibly medical forensics. That evening, I made a call to an old friend, a retired detective named Frank Sullivan, who had once helped me track down a subcontractor who disappeared with a significant amount of company materials. Frank had since started a private investigation firm specializing in complex fraud cases. "Rich," he greeted me warmly when he answered. "It's been too long. I was sorry to hear about Michael. Damn shame." "Thanks, Frank," I said. "But I'm afraid I might need your professional services. What happened to Michael? I don't think it was natural causes." There was a pause on the line. "That's a serious allegation, Rich. You got anything to back it up? Enough to make me suspicious, not enough to go to the authorities yet." "Tell you what," Frank said after another moment of consideration. "Come by my office tomorrow. Bring whatever you've got. We'll take it from there." I agreed, setting a time for the meeting. As I hung up, I noticed a text message had come through on my phone. It was from Alina, Michael's assistant. "V cleaning out my office tomorrow. Already shredding documents. Coming to house after." My heart raced. If Vanessa was destroying evidence at Michael's workplace, she might do the same here. I needed to secure anything potentially valuable before she arrived. I spent the next few hours searching the house, looking for anything Michael might have hidden. More backup drives, physical documents, anything that could help build a case. In his old bedroom closet, behind a loose baseboard I remembered him using as a hiding place for candy when he was a child, I found a small fireproof lockbox. It wasn't locked, the key was taped to the bottom, and inside was a collection of papers. Medical test results, bank statements, and most importantly, a handwritten letter addressed to me. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dad, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I hope I'm wrong, but I can't ignore the signs anymore. Vanessa isn't who we thought she was. I've discovered things, terrible things, that I can't fully explain here. I'm working to get proof, to figure out exactly what she's involved in and with whom. What I know for sure is that she's been systematically draining my accounts, manipulating documents, and I believe she may be responsible for my declining health. I've changed my will back. The new one is with Harold. He's the only one I trust with this. The house is yours, as it should be. I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused you by pulling away these past months. I was trying to protect you while I figured out what was happening. If anything happens to me, don't trust Vanessa. Don't sign anything she gives you. Get help from people outside her circle of influence. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry I couldn't be the son you deserved these past few months. I hope someday you'll understand why. Michael." The letter was dated just 10 days before his death. My son had known he was in danger. He'd tried to fix things before it was too late. But Vanessa had moved faster. I carefully returned everything to the lockbox, but kept Michael's letter, folding it and placing it in my wallet. Tomorrow I would take it and the flash drive to Frank. Together, we would begin building a case. But tonight, I needed to secure the house against Vanessa's impending visit. I called Elena back. How much time do I have before she comes here? She's still at the office. At least a couple of hours. She's being thorough. Can you do something for me? For Michael? Elena didn't hesitate. Anything, Mr. Harmon? I need you to find something at the office. Something that will distract her, keep her there longer. Can you do that? Consider it done, Elena replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. I know exactly what will keep her occupied. I hung up and got to work, moving methodically through the house, gathering anything that might be important, anything that could help prove what had happened to my son. By the time I was finished, I had a small collection of items. The flash drive, Michael's letter, the medical reports, and a few other documents I'd found in his desk. As I prepared to leave, Max at my heels, I took one last look around the home that had held my life for over 4 decades. I didn't know if I would ever return, if I would ever reclaim what was rightfully mine. But I did know that I wouldn't rest until I had uncovered the full truth about my son's death and ensured that those responsible faced justice. With a heavy heart but a steely resolve, I loaded Max into my truck and drove away from the house, the evidence of Vanessa's crime secure in a small duffel bag beside me. The fight for justice had begun. Frank's office was located in a converted warehouse in South Boston, the kind of gentrified industrial space that now housed tech startups and artisanal coffee shops. Despite the trendy surroundings, Frank himself remained refreshingly old school. A barrel-chested man in his early 70s with a bristling white mustache and the no-nonsense demeanor of his 40 years in law enforcement. "You look like hell, Rich," he greeted me, ushering me into his office. Max trotted in behind me, immediately making himself at home on a worn leather couch in the corner. "Feel worse," I admitted, sinking into a chair across from Frank's cluttered desk. "But I'm managing." Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd lost his own son years ago to cancer, not foul play, but the grief of outliving your child was a bond few could comprehend. "Tell me everything," he said simply. For the next hour I laid it all out. Vanessa's behavior after Michael's death, the suspicious legal documents, the evidence I'd found on the flash drive and in the lockbox, and finally, Michael's letter. Frank took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly listening with the practiced patience of a career investigator. When I finished, he sat back, tapping his pen against his notepad. "You've got enough here to raise serious questions," he said slowly. "The medical reports alone suggest something wasn't right with Michael's health, and that letter," he shook his head. "If we could prove Vanessa had been poisoning him, even if we can't directly connect her to his death, it would be enough to invalidate any legal documents he signed during that period. Diminished capacity due to medical tampering. Can we prove it?" I asked, hope and dread mingling in my chest. Frank's expression turned grim. "Maybe it won't be easy or cheap. We'd need to exhume the body, run toxicology tests looking for specific substances. That requires a court order, which means involving the legal system. Which brings us back to Vanessa's brother-in-law at the police department," I finished for him. "Exactly, but there might be another approach." Frank leaned forward. "Financial crimes leave paper trails. If Vanessa has been embezzling from Michael, or if there's money laundering involved with these offshore accounts, that might be an easier angle to pursue initially. Follow the money, build a case, and then use that leverage to get the medical investigation rolling." I nodded, seeing the logic in his approach. "So where do we start?" "I have a forensic accountant who works with me on cases like this. Top-notch, very discreet. I'll get her looking at the financial records today. In the meantime," he fixed me with a stern look, "you need to keep playing along with Vanessa, make her think you're cooperating. The moment she suspects you're investigating her, things could get dangerous." The word hung in the air between us. Dangerous. If Vanessa had indeed murdered my son, what would stop her from coming after me if she felt threatened? "I'm not afraid of her," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You should be," Frank replied bluntly. "Women like her, cold, calculating, willing to kill for money, they're the most dangerous kind. They plan meticulously. They leave few traces, and they don't hesitate when cornered." I thought of Vanessa's perfectly manicured appearance, her controlled emotions, the precise way she had laid out her plans for my eviction. Frank was right. She was dangerous precisely because she was so controlled, so deliberate in her actions. Stay somewhere she doesn't know about, Frank continued. Don't tell anyone where you're going, use cash, not credit cards. And keep that dog with you at all times. Animals have better instincts than we do when it comes to people with bad intentions. I agreed to his precautions, though they seemed excessive. Part of me still couldn't fully accept that my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had loved and married, could be capable of such calculated evil. But the evidence was mounting, and I couldn't afford to take chances. One more thing, Frank said as I prepared to leave. We need to talk to this Harold Person, the accountant. If Michael really did change his will back, as his letter claims, we need to find that document before Vanessa destroys it. I promised to arrange a meeting with Harold as soon as possible. As I drove away from Frank's office, Max sitting alertly in the passenger seat beside me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for my son, fear of what Vanessa might do next, but also a growing determination to see this through to the end. I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, paying cash as Frank had advised. It was a far cry from the comfortable home I'd lived in for most of my adult life. A single room with faded floral wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and the persistent smell of old cigarette smoke. But it would serve as a base of operations while the investigation progressed. After settling Max with food and water, I called Harold and arranged to meet him the following morning at a coffee shop near his office. Then I called Vanessa, steeling myself for the conversation. "Richard," she answered, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation. "Where are you? I came by the house and you weren't there." "I'm looking at apartments," I lied smoothly. "Thought I'd get a head start on finding a new place." "I see," she sounded slightly mollified. "Well, I need you to come sign those papers we discussed. Tomorrow morning would be ideal." "I can't tomorrow morning," I said, injecting a note of apology into my voice. "I have a doctor's appointment. Thought I should get checked out like you suggested." A pause. "Fine, tomorrow afternoon then." "I'll try," I hedged. "Depends how the appointment goes. You know how doctors can be, especially with us old folks. They find one thing wrong and suddenly they want to run a dozen tests." Another pause, longer this time. "Richard, I'm trying to be patient with you, given the circumstances. But I need those papers signed. The sooner we get this sorted out, the sooner we can both move on with our lives." The casual cruelty of her words, as if my son's death and my impending homelessness were mere inconveniences to be sorted out, stoked the anger burning low in my gut. But I kept my voice level, playing the role of the cooperative old man just as Frank had advised. "I understand, Vanessa. I'll do my best to come by tomorrow afternoon, and I've been going through Michael's things like you asked. There are some old family photos I'd like to keep, if that's all right." "Fine, whatever," she said dismissively. "Just make sure you're not taking anything valuable." The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me seething but satisfied that I'd maintained my cover. Vanessa still believed she had the upper hand, that I was simply an old man going through the motions of grief while complying with her demands. She had no idea that I was building a case against her, gathering evidence that might one day send her to prison. As I settled in for a restless night in the unfamiliar motel room, Max curled protectively at my feet, I found my thoughts returning to Michael's letter. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the son you deserved these past few months." The words haunted me. Even in his final days, facing threats I couldn't imagine, my son had been worried about disappointing me. "Oh, Michael," I whispered into the darkness, "you were always more than I deserved. And I promise you, I won't let her get away with this." Morning brought a watery sun and the sounds of early traffic from the highway outside my window. I rose early, took Max for a quick walk around the motel's parking lot, and then prepared for my meeting with Harold. The coffee shop was crowded when I arrived, which suited our purposes perfectly. Harold was already there, a thin, nervous-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and a receding hairline. He'd been our family accountant for decades, watching Michael grow from a boy to a man, handling his college fund, his first investment portfolio, and eventually his marriage finances. "Richard," he greeted me, rising halfway from his seat and extending a hand. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I settled into the chair across from him, accepting the cup of coffee he'd already ordered for me. "Harold, thank you for meeting like this." He nodded, glancing around the busy shop as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I've been worried about you, especially after what Alina said about Vanessa clearing out Michael's office." "She's moving quickly," I agreed grimly. "Too quickly for normal grief." Harold leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Michael came to see me about 2 months before he died. He was concerned about changes to his will and property deeds that he didn't remember authorizing. We looked into it together and found that several documents had been filed with his signature, or what appeared to be his signature, transferring assets to Vanessa's name." "Forgeries?" I asked. Harold hesitated. "Not exactly. The signatures matched his handwriting, but Michael was adamant he hadn't signed them, at least not knowingly." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "You think she drugged him? Had him sign papers while he wasn't fully aware?" "It's possible, or perhaps used documents he'd signed for other purposes and altered them afterward. Either way, Michael was convinced something underhanded was happening. So we took steps." "What kind of steps?" Harold reached into his briefcase and extracted a sealed envelope. "Michael executed a new will, properly witnessed by myself and 2 other colleagues. In it, he revokes all previous wills, and specifically leaves the house and the majority of his assets to you. He also included a statement indicating that any documents signed by him in the previous 6 months should be carefully scrutinized for authenticity, as he believed he may have been manipulated into signing things under duress or while medically compromised." My hands trembled slightly as I took the envelope. "Why didn't you come forward with this at the funeral?" Harold's expression turned pained. "I tried to, but when I approached the executor of the estate, a lawyer named James Brennan, who happens to be a close friend of Vanessa's family, he informed me that a more recent will had already been filed. When I mentioned Michael's concerns about manipulation, he dismissed them as the paranoid ramblings of a man whose health was failing." Harold's jaw tightened. "He threatened to report me to the state licensing board for attempting to introduce a fraudulent will if I pursued the matter." The pieces were falling into place. Vanessa had connections not just in the police department, but in the legal community as well. She'd built a protective network around herself, insulating her from consequences. "So what do we do now?" I asked. "I've made copies of everything," Harold said, tapping the envelope. "The original will is in my firm's vault. I've also been quietly compiling financial records showing the pattern of unusual transactions from Michael's accounts. It's not proof of murder, but it demonstrates a clear pattern of financial manipulation that coincides with the period when Michael was experiencing health problems." I filled Harold in on my meeting with Frank and the investigation that was now underway. He seemed relieved to know that professionals were involved, that the burden of uncovering the truth didn't rest solely on his shoulders. "There's one more thing," Harold said as our meeting drew to a close. "Michael had a safety deposit box at Boston First National, box number 718. He added my name to the access list just weeks before he died, but I haven't had a chance to look inside yet. He was very secretive about it, just said it contained insurance in case something happened to him." "We need to see what's in that box," I said, already imagining what kind of evidence Michael might have secured there. "Can you arrange access?" Harold nodded. "I'll set it up for tomorrow morning. Meet me at the bank at 9 a.m. As we parted ways, I felt a surge of hope for the first time since Michael's death. My son had been smart, smarter than Vanessa had given him credit for. He'd seen the danger coming and had taken steps to protect himself and me. Now it was up to us to use what he'd left behind to bring his killer to justice. I spent the rest of the day carefully avoiding Vanessa's calls and texts, each one growing increasingly demanding. "Where are you? When are you coming to sign the papers? This is getting ridiculous, Richard." I responded only once, late in the afternoon, with a brief message claiming that my medical tests had taken longer than expected and that I would be in touch tomorrow. That night, back in my dingy motel room, I received a call from Frank. "We've got something," he said without preamble. "My forensic accountant found a pattern of transfers from Michael's accounts to a shell company called Meridian Ventures. Guess who owns Meridian Ventures? James Brennan, the lawyer handling Michael's estate." "Vanessa's family friend," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "Exactly, and here's where it gets interesting. Brennan has been transferring funds from Meridian to another entity based in the Cayman Islands, an entity that lists Vanessa as a beneficial owner." So they've been working together to steal from Michael, I said, anger building in my chest. For how long? At least 18 months, Frank replied. Well before Michael started showing signs of illness. The total amount is just over $1.2 million. The figure stunned me. My son had been successful, certainly, but $1.2 million represented a significant portion of his life savings. Can we take this to the authorities? Not yet, Frank cautioned. Financial crimes are complicated to prosecute, and with Vanessa's connections, we need an airtight case. But it's a start. It establishes motive and a pattern of criminal behavior. I updated Frank on my conversation with Harold and the safety deposit box we planned to access the next day. That could be the missing piece, Frank said, his voice taking on an edge of excitement. If Michael documented his suspicions, or better yet, collected physical evidence of poisoning, we might have enough to go to a judge for an exhumation order. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the sagging motel bed, trying to process everything I'd learned. The scope of Vanessa's betrayal was staggering. Not just the theft of money, not just the manipulation of legal documents, but potentially the calculated murder of my son. All for what? Greed. The desire to escape a marriage she no longer wanted, taking as much as she could on her way out. I thought of Michael as a child, his open, trusting face, his eagerness to see the good in everyone. How had he fallen in love with someone capable of such cold-blooded calculation? Had she shown him a different face during their courtship, only revealing her true nature once she had secured her position in his life? Or had my son, grieving the loss of his mother, been vulnerable to manipulation, seeking comfort in the arms of someone who saw only an opportunity? These questions would likely never be fully answered. What mattered now was justice. Justice for Michael, justice for me, and ensuring that Vanessa could never hurt anyone else as she had hurt us. With that resolve firmly in mind, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of my son's face, not as the successful professional he'd become, but as the earnest boy who had once looked up to me as if I could fix anything, solve any problem, protect him from any harm. In my dream, he was asking me why I hadn't saved him, why I hadn't seen the danger until it was too late. I woke with tears on my face and a renewed determination in my heart. I couldn't change the past, couldn't bring Michael back, but I could ensure that his killer faced justice. It was the last thing I could do for my son, and I would not fail him. The Boston First National Bank was an imposing granite structure in the financial district, its ornate facade a testament to old money and established power. Harold was waiting for me on the steps, looking even more nervous than he had at our coffee shop meeting. "I've set everything up," he said by way of greeting. "They're expecting us." We were escorted to a private room where a bank officer brought us the safety deposit box, a rectangular metal container about the size of a shoebox. After verifying our identities and having us sign the access log, the officer left us alone with the box. Harold's hands shook slightly as he inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside were several items. A USB drive similar to the one Dave had given me, a small recorder, and a manila envelope. I reached for the envelope first, opening it carefully. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, documenting Vanessa's meetings with various individuals over the course of several months. Each photo was labeled with a date, time, and location. Some showed her with James Brennan, others with a man I recognized from Michael's surveillance photos as the one she'd been embracing. Still others showed her meeting with various strangers in parking garages, restaurants, and hotel lobbies. "Michael had her followed," Harold murmured, examining the photos over my shoulder. "Professional surveillance by the look of it." Next, I picked up the recorder. It was a small digital device, the kind journalists use for interviews. I pressed play, and Vanessa's voice filled the room. "I can't keep doing this, James. It's taking too long. The supplements aren't working fast enough." A male voice, presumably Brennan's, responded, "Patience, V too much too quickly will raise suspicions. The toxicology panel at his last checkup already showed elevated levels. We need to be careful." "I don't have time for careful," Vanessa snapped. "Every day he's becoming more suspicious. Yesterday he asked me directly about the transfers to Meridian. I had to lie, tell him it was a new investment strategy you recommended." "Did he believe you?" A pause. "I don't know. He seemed to, but he's been acting different lately, more guarded. And I found him in his office last night, on the phone with someone, but he hung up as soon as I walked in. Maybe it's time for Plan B, Brennan suggested, his tone eerily casual. The injectable version would be much faster. One dose, cardiac arrest, no questions asked, especially with his family history. Another pause, longer this time. I'll think about it. Give me the weekend to decide. The recording ended. Harold and I sat in stunned silence, the implications of what we'd just heard hanging heavy in the air between us. This wasn't just evidence of financial crimes or manipulation. This was a recorded conversation discussing the planned murder of my son. My God, Harold finally whispered. They actually did it. They poisoned him, and when that wasn't working fast enough, He couldn't finish the sentence. I felt strangely calm, the shock giving way to a cold, clear certainty. We need to get this to Frank immediately, I said, gathering the items and returning them to the box. And we need to make copies of everything, store them in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to one set of evidence, we'll have backups. Harold nodded, his professional training kicking in despite his obvious distress. I know a place that can do secure digital copies. We should go there first, then to your investigator. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Vanessa. Enough games, Richard. I'm coming to find you. My lawyer has prepared eviction papers. This ends today. I showed the message to Harold, whose face paled. She's escalating if she suspects what we're doing. Then we need to move quickly, I finished for him. Let's get these copies made and get to Frank. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. We visited a specialty data security firm where Harold knew the owner, having handled his taxes for years. They made secure digital copies of all the evidence, the photos, the audio recording, the contents of the USB drive, and stored them with strong encryption. Harold and I each received a copy, with a third sent directly to Frank's office. By early afternoon, we were seated in Frank's office, laying out everything we'd discovered. Frank's expression grew increasingly grim as he examined the evidence, particularly the recorded conversation about poison. This is damning, he said finally, setting down the photos. With this recording and the financial evidence, we have enough to go to a judge for a warrant, not just for exhumation, but for Vanessa's arrest on conspiracy to commit murder. What about her connections? I asked. Her brother-in-law at the police department, her friend Brennan in the legal system. Frank's smile was wolfish. That's why we're not going to the Boston PD or the local DA. I have contacts at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Wire fraud across state lines, conspiracy to commit murder. This is federal territory now. Vanessa's local connections won't help her. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. We had proof, we had a path forward. Justice for my son was within reach. But as we were finalizing plans to take our evidence to Frank's FBI contact, my phone rang. The screen showed Alina's number. Mr. Harmon, she said when I answered, her voice tight with fear. Vanessa was just here at the office. She was asking about you, about whether anyone had been in contact with you. She mentioned something about Michael's safety deposit box and seemed very agitated. I think she knows something's going on. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Did you tell her anything? No, of course not, but Richard. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her, someone I've never seen before. He didn't look like a lawyer, he looked dangerous. Frank, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, held out his hand for the phone. I passed it to him, and he spoke briefly with Alina, asking detailed questions about the man's appearance and behavior. When he hung up, his expression was deadly serious. We need to move now, he said, already reaching for his own phone. If Vanessa has hired muscle, she's desperate, and desperate people make their most dangerous moves when they feel cornered. Within the hour, Frank had arranged for a meeting with his FBI contact at a secure location. Harold would take the physical evidence directly there, while Frank and I handled another crucial task: securing a judge's signature on an emergency order to prevent any tampering with Michael's body or cremation, which Vanessa had been pushing for despite my objections. I'm coming with you, I insisted when Frank suggested I go to a safe house until things were settled. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Just stay close and do exactly as I say. These next few hours will determine everything. As we prepared to leave, I thought about how quickly my life had changed. Just days ago, I had been a grieving father, bewildered by my daughter-in-law's sudden cruelty, but still believing my son had died of natural causes. Now I was at the center of a murder investigation, racing against time to secure evidence before a killer could cover her tracks. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a grim resolve. Michael had fought alone against Vanessa's schemes, trying to protect me even as he struggled to uncover the truth. Now it was my turn to fight for him, and this time, the truth would prevail. We made it to the courthouse just before closing, Frank's credentials and contacts smoothing our way to an emergency hearing with Judge Melissa Reyes, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s known for her strict interpretation of the law. "This is highly unusual, Mr. Sullivan," she said as we presented our case, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Preventing cremation based on suspicion of foul play without an official police investigation underway. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence suggesting Mr. Harmon's death was not from natural causes," Frank replied, presenting the recording and financial documents. "Given the sensitive nature of these allegations and concerns about local law enforcement connections to the suspect, we're requesting this order while federal authorities review the case." Judge Reyes listened to a portion of the recording, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is disturbing evidence, gentlemen. Normally, I would require an official investigation before granting such an order, but given the circumstances." She signed the order with a decisive flourish. "This prevents any cremation or tampering with the deceased's remains for 30 days, pending investigation by appropriate authorities." Relief washed over me. It wasn't justice yet, but it was a crucial first step. As we left the courthouse, Frank received a call from Harold confirming that he'd successfully delivered the evidence to the FBI contact, who had promised immediate action. "We should have a federal warrant for Vanessa's arrest by morning," Frank informed me as we walked to his car. "In the meantime, you're coming to my place. It's not safe for you to be alone tonight." I started to protest, but stopped when I saw the serious set of his jaw. Frank had been in law enforcement long enough to develop reliable instincts, and if he believed I was in danger, I wasn't going to argue. We were halfway to Frank's home when my phone rang again. "Unknown number," I answered cautiously. "Richard," Vanessa's voice was eerily calm. "I know what you've been doing. Did you really think I wouldn't find out, that I wouldn't have people watching you?" My blood ran cold, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Vanessa, I was just about to call you. I've been thinking about those papers you wanted me to sign." "Save it," she cut in sharply. "We're well past that now. You've made things very difficult, Richard, very messy. And I don't like mess." Frank was gesturing for me to keep her talking, mouthing "trace the call" as he sent a text message, presumably to his FBI contact. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked, stalling for time. "What I've always wanted. What's mine? Michael's money, the house, a clean break." Her voice hardened. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had to start digging, asking questions, meeting with Michael's friends. Now things have to get complicated." "It doesn't have to be this way," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "We can still work something out." A cold laugh. "Oh, Richard, always the pragmatic businessman looking for a compromise. But there is no compromise here. Either you back off completely, destroy whatever evidence you think you have, sign the house over to me, disappear from my life forever, or there will be consequences. Severe ones. Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you one last chance," she replied, her tone suddenly businesslike. "Meet me at the house tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. Bring all copies of whatever you've collected. We'll sign the papers, and then you'll leave Boston and never return." "And if I refuse?" Another pause. "Then I can't be responsible for what happens next, to you or to anyone else who's been helping you. That nice accountant Harold, for instance, or Michael's pretty assistant Alina. It would be a shame if something happened to them, wouldn't it?" The threat was unmistakable. Before I could respond, she continued, "8 p.m., Richard. Don't be late and don't try anything clever. I'll know if you're not alone." The call ended. I looked at Frank, who was already on his own phone, speaking rapidly to someone about protective custody for Harold and Alina. "We've got a trace on the location," he said after hanging up. "She's at your house." "I need to meet her," I said, the decision forming in my mind even as Frank began to shake his head. Not to give in, but to keep her there until the FBI can make the arrest. If she runs now, with her connections and resources, she might disappear. We might never get justice for Michael. It's too dangerous, Frank argued. She's already threatened 3 lives, she's desperate and cornered, that makes her unpredictable. I know her, I insisted. I've watched her for years, seen how she operates. She's calculated, not impulsive. She'll want to confirm I've destroyed the evidence before she makes any move against me. That gives us time. Frank studied my face, clearly torn between professional caution and recognition of the opportunity. Finally, he sighed. We do this by the book. You wear a wire. FBI agents will be positioned around the house. At the first sign of danger, they move in, regardless of whether we've got her full confession. I nodded, relief and determination filling me in equal measure. Agreed, let's finish this for Michael. The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Frank's FBI contact, a serious woman named Agent Chen, arrived with a team of agents. They outfitted me with a sophisticated wire, tested the audio multiple times, and briefed me extensively on how to handle the meeting. Keep her talking about Michael's death, Agent Chen instructed. Try to get her to confirm what's on the recording, the poisoning, the injection. Don't accuse her directly, but express your suspicions and see how she responds. Most importantly, don't put yourself at risk. If at any point you feel threatened, use the code word Margaret, and we'll move in immediately. As 8 p.m. approached, I found myself thinking of Margaret, of how she would have handled this situation. My practical, level-headed wife had always been the voice of reason in our family. What would she say now, knowing I was about to confront our son's murderer? I like to think she would approve, that she would understand this was something I had to do, not just for justice, but for my own ability to live with myself afterward. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived, exactly at 8 p.m. The familiar facade looked somehow different in the gathering darkness, as if the home itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how this final confrontation would play out. I knocked on my own front door, a strange formality that underscored how much had changed. Vanessa opened it almost immediately, dressed impeccably as always in a sleek black dress that seemed more appropriate for a business dinner than a confrontation with her father-in-law. Right on time, she said, stepping back to let me enter. I've always appreciated that about you, Richard, your reliability. The living room was dimly lit, just a single lamp casting long shadows across the familiar furniture. I noticed a glass of wine on the coffee table, Vanessa's preferred expensive Chardonnay, and beside it, a legal document that I assumed was the property transfer she'd been so insistent about. I assume you've brought what I asked for? She inquired, gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing. First, I want some answers, Vanessa. I think you owe me that much. A flicker of irritation crossed her perfect features, quickly masked. Answers about what? About Michael, about how he really died. She sighed, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. We've been through this, Richard. It was a heart attack, tragic, unexpected, but natural. These things happen. Do they? I challenged, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. Or do they happen when someone has been poisoning them for months and then finally injects them with something to cause cardiac arrest? Vanessa's expression didn't change, but I noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her wine glass. That's absurd and potentially slanderous. Grief has clearly affected your judgment. I found the recording, Vanessa, you and Brennan discussing the supplements not working fast enough, discussing Plan B and an injectable that would cause cardiac arrest with no questions asked. For a moment, she said nothing, simply studying me with those cold, calculating eyes. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. And where exactly is this alleged recording now? Somewhere safe, I replied. Along with evidence of the money you and Brennan embezzled from Michael's accounts, the surveillance photos showing your meetings with various accomplices, and Michael's real will, the one he changed just before his death, leaving everything to me. The smile faded from her face. You're bluffing. If you had actual evidence, you'd have gone to the police already. Who says I haven't? Why do you think Judd Ray's signed an order today preventing Michael's cremation pending investigation? Why do you think the FBI is looking into wire fraud charges against you and Brennan right now? A flash of genuine alarm crossed her face before she controlled it. You're making a mistake, Richard. A very dangerous mistake. No, Vanessa, the mistake was yours. You underestimated me just like you underestimated Michael. You thought we were both easy marks, a trusting son and his aging father, too emotionally invested to see what was happening right.